In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. Today's guest is someone I am really looking forward to speaking with. He started his career in management consulting before launching into entrepreneurship with his first venture. He's a pioneer in the e-commerce space with expertise in the fast-evolving world of e-commerce, affiliate marketing, and digital influencers. His current venture is a creator management platform that focuses on monetizing digital creators. And the company partners with well-known brands such as Sony, Wayfair, and Steve Madden. He is the CEO and co-founder of LoudCrowd. Please welcome Gary Garofalo to the show.
Thank you, Natalie. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you, Gary. And I have a bunch of topics I want to get into with you today. And I wanted to start by asking, what is the biggest misconception out there about driving major change in an organization?
Yeah, I think for us, we always look at the biggest component of change as people and kind of a human capital issue. I'll start by saying I work at an early stage SaaS company. We've got, around 30 employees. And so change is just a really, really important piece of our DNA. SaaS companies that are not kind of aggressively pursuing change and aggressively pursuing iterations just generally don't perform well. And I would just say we're also usually pretty well positioned. A software company is pretty well positioned to hire people that are excited about change because it's just, as an industry, I just think that's an important part of software. So, I would start by saying just we are in the software industry pretty well positioned to be people that are ready to handle change. But for me, the most important aspect of change is always going to come down to people. People, every business now, in the age of information, every business is in a competitive space, and it's just hard to build a company that's profitable, a company that has product market fit, all of those things. And every human being in a company is, usually pretty critical to that. If you lose sales momentum, operational momentum, product momentum, all of those pieces are really, really critical. And, executing is just harder than ever. And so I just think when you're making an adjustment, you're going to be counting on your team to execute at a high level for whatever it is. When you're making an adjustment, you're changing people's day to day. And if you have organizational resistance, if the human beings, the human capital in your organization are not excited about the changes that you're making, you're going to have really, really big problems because, like I said, business is hard and it takes execution at every level. You need people to be leaning into changes, and you need people that are excited about kind of rebuilding processes and rebuilding go-to-market, whatever it is. And so change for us really does start with the cultural thing. We have to make sure that every single human being that's going to be part of a change is excited about building something new. If they are not, it's just not going to work because, like I said, it's just too competitive out there. So it starts for human capital. And that is kind of a DNA that is built into an organization to get right.
Yeah. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but curious, do people have to naturally get excited on their own, or are there things you can do to bring people along?
Yeah, I mean, it is much, much easier if you are hiring for people that are generally excited about change. And so, like I said, software industry, we have an advantage, and people generally know what they're signing up for. They generally understand that, software companies, to be successful, they got to be 3Xing, every year or something like that. And 3X, there's going to be radical changes kind of throughout the organization. So I do think, there are going to be groups of people that are more excited about change and naturally are going to be more supportive of it. So that is an important component, and it really determines how much change you can, execute in an organization. But there's also a really important leadership component. Like my company can be more ambitious about the changes that, we undergo. We can talk a little bit about today about, we have done pivots in our product, major pivots in our go-to-market, things like that. I'm able to be a little bit more ambitious because people signing up for software companies understand that that's an important component of it. I would just say, if you're in a company that is not software, it's not, hey, we're tripling every year, we're growing 30% year over year. Obviously you can be a little bit less ambitious with the change you're trying to execute, but it still is going to require leadership. I think in any business, it's going to require leadership to understand how much change you can implement, and really kind of push their people, to the maximum to try to get the most out of what they can. So leadership is always going to be charged with driving as much change as possible. I just think they have to set the right expectations and just understand who your team is, what your industry is, and really where, are you going to set your targets in terms of, how ambitious can you be?
Right, right. Well, and I think you're talking about, tech, but I think the reality is there's so much changing just in the landscape today that even companies that are not like SaaS companies or tech still need to be looking at the changes coming at them and how to respond. So I'm with you on just how important that really is. And you mentioned culture a few times now. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what you've done to kind of build and kind of refine the culture in your organization?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think if you're going to build a culture for change, the single most important thing is building a culture where failure is okay, right? Everyone, it doesn't matter, what stage of life somebody is in. It doesn't matter really what their career ambitions are in. Everybody wants to do a good job. Um, and so if change is going to be an important part of your company's DNA, people are still going to try to, they're looking for career stability. They're looking for, career momentum and, being able to move up. Everybody, regardless of their situation, is going to want to do a good job. If in your company's DNA, uh, failure is not okay, the I would say tendency to make sure that everything looks good and their work is perceived as valuable is going to really overcome everything. And if you're changing the goalposts on somebody, they're going to be highly resistant to what you're trying to do. And so, what you need to make sure is you've built a culture where failure is okay. And when you're undergoing change, you can explain to somebody like, hey, all right, here was your target, or here's how we used to go to market. We are going to be doing something different. It is very, very okay if you're not executing and you're missing this target or you're missing blah blah. What is important is the feedback loop. And what is important is that you're giving all the data from the market or you're giving all the data from, this product that we're building back to the team and we can, work through as a team kind of adjustments that need to be made. If you have a culture where it's okay to fail, um, it's going to be much, much easier for people to get on board with change and for people to adapt to, whatever adjustments we're trying to make. Otherwise, what happens is, uh, people are going to sugarcoat things. People are going to try to position themselves as they're doing a good job. You're potentially going to miss some really, really important market signals, and you're not going to be able to execute on the change because people are, kind of CYA. So I'd say, the first most important component is have a culture where it's okay to fail. Have a culture where people can be very transparent about what's happening day to day, why they're, struggling with X, Y, and Z. And then people are going to be able to make the adjustments that they're, going to need to make for whatever their role is.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like? Because I think that's really important to have that kind of understanding that it's okay to fail. Are there things that you do internally to support that, to kind of prove it to the team that it's not just words, but have actions behind it?
Yeah. I mean, it is actually pretty easy to implement. And I think a lot of organizations get it wrong. It's just the leadership has to be okay with that themselves, right? Like you have to approach every single conversation. Let's say it's a one on one with a team member. Let's say it's a team meeting. You have to approach every single conversation where you are willing to be wrong and you're willing to change your mind. And so, tactically in a meeting, whether you're at the very top C suite or whether you're just a manager of people, you have to be able to hold your beliefs very, very loosely, change your opinion in meetings, give a lot of ground to people. And if you show your team that you are willing to fail, you are willing to be incorrect more often than you're correct, and the whole team is just striving to kind of get to the right answer, it's gonna trickle down to the organization. If you're a leader that holds their beliefs very, very strongly, if you're a leader that doesn't like to be wrong in a normal conversation, there's just no way your culture is going to be adaptive to failure, and there's just no way you're going to be able to implement changes. So it is just a personal thing, meeting by meeting, day by day. You very, very much have to be willing to be wrong in most conversations, and you have to, you know, give ground on basically everything you're talking about.
Right, right. And I'm curious, before we move off of culture, are there any other components that you've developed in the culture that you feel are kind of critical to that successful kind of ongoing change?
I would say number one, being willing to be wrong is probably the most important. But the other piece is, and this is, you know, I think software companies are going to have an easier time being good at this, but hiring people where, let's say, their career trajectory really aligns with what the company is trying to do. We hire a lot of, younger, ambitious people at software companies. Um, those people, by their nature, are going to like change because change usually is an opportunity to kind of move up in an organization. And so when we hire somebody, we talk about, number one, kind of what the job is and are you going to be able to do it? But two, really what the career trajectory is. And we try to hire people that are ambitious and they want to move up. Those people are going to be very, very receptive to any change that you're talking about because, they can move up. It's if you're a Game of Thrones fan, I don't know if it's the best analogy, but chaos is a ladder. That, to a certain extent has to be the attitude of somebody that you hire. They are going to want change because that's going to be a career opportunity for them. That's going to be a leadership opportunity for them. When there is change, there's a million things that you have to work on, processes that you have to improve. Those are opportunities for them to stand out. So if you hire the person that wants to stand out and then really wants to move up, they're going to be really excited about that. So I'd say it's a combination of making the right cultural, DNA where failure is okay, and also just hiring people that are ambitious and they want to move up very quickly.
Yep. Yeah. I have a question for you about the pace of change because you're talking about this kind of continuous, cycle of change and iteration. Is there too much change, too fast, and how do you find that right balance?
Yeah, awesome question. So I would say the simple answer is there's no, it is, I think, leadership's responsibility to change as much as possible, always, really. Like, unless you're Google, who's created some kind of incredible monopoly, the rate at which you change is really the rate at which your company can improve. And so it's going to be different for different types of companies. Like I said, software companies really have to set a very, very high bar for how quickly can you change. If you're working in the insurance industry and you've been around for 150 years, or if you're Urme and you're a seventh generation company, obviously, how much change you're trying to implement is going to be lower. Um, but really, it is leadership's responsibility to improve as much as you can uh, every single day, every single year. And so, leadership should endeavor to change as much as they possibly can. I would say the flip side of that is you don't want to create a culture, and you don't want to. You're not going to be able to lead your team if you constantly are going back and forth on things and flip flopping on things. And so I've just seen a lot of software companies where they are constantly pivoting their product. They're not really giving things a chance to succeed. I would say that's different. Constantly having, I'll call it like ADD, having ADD and moving around and constantly trying different things and undoing the things that you worked on. That can be really, really, I would say, disingenuous and demotivating to a team. Um, that is just very much different than constantly seeking improvement. You can't completely change, you know, I would say if you're implementing some type of change, you want to show your team that you are serious about seeing it through and that we're making as many micro changes as possible, but completely changing the direction of your company or the direction of a product day over day, month over month is just going to get people dejected. So implement as much change as you possibly can, but the core mission, the core values, things like that, those can be updated, but you really can't be updating those on a monthly or yearly basis. You only get a couple of, hey, we're totally changing what we're doing if you're an organization.
Right. Right. And I'd love to dive into an example of yours to help kind of bring some of this to life. I know I'll have some more questions around that. But can you tell me, like, what is the biggest or most impactful change that you've driven in an organization?
Yeah. So I mean, the biggest one for us by a mile is we had a pivot at LoudCrowd, right? And alluding to what I was just saying, you only get a couple of those. Slack started off as a gaming company, and then they pivoted to a kind of a B2B messaging tool that we all use now. You only get one or two of those tops. You have to be implementing change constantly. You can't be pivoting, every 6 months. And so the biggest change for LoudCrowd was we started out, we've always been in the creator space, but we really started out as a tool that was an ambassador management tool. And really the main value for our clients was, if you're a brand, we're going to help you get more of your customers talking about you on social, creating content for you on social. Where we pivoted to, we're still a creator focused tool. We're still trying to, grow marketing for brands on social media. But where we pivoted to was the value and the metrics that we were looking at were no longer content. So think of this as like, hey, we've got 1,000 people talking about us on Instagram every day. We pivoted from that to we're trying to drive as much revenue as possible. So we're still trying to drive content, but the KPI is how many affiliate sales have you done? How much attributable revenue have you done? And to do that, you know, it's a major value change for our customers, obviously, but to do that, it also involved radically changing our product. So we didn't really change who we were selling to, but we changed the KPI, that we were selling. And then to execute on the new KPI, we really had to massively redo our product. There were foundational pieces that we got to take over. But we really foundationally built structurally built a new product. So that was a very, very major change for a software company. When you do that, everything has to change, right? The sales go to market motion. Not only are we showing and talking about a different product, but we fundamentally had to change everything because there was a new metric and a new type of value that we needed to change. So, from top of the funnel all the way through bottom of the funnel, everything changed. From a support perspective, everything changed because we're no longer selling content. We are now selling attributable revenue. So they had to change their functions. And then obviously, from a product perspective, we built a new product. So it was just really every piece of the company had to pretty radically change. That's been, a work in progress for 2.5 years now. And we're still making improvements every day. If I went back to the team and said, hey, this is the new thing, like I wouldn't be able to do that again, right? Getting everybody on board with such a foundational change is really something you can only do once or twice as a software company. It's very, very hard. It requires a lot of focus and a lot of effort from your team. So you can't really keep going back to the well on that. Fortunately for us, the change has worked out very, very well. We're doing better than we ever have as a business. But if that wasn't the case, I would say I wouldn't have another one of those left in the bag.
Yep. I like that. The equity with the team on changes like that. I'm curious to take a step back on this and ask kind of what drove the change? Like where did the inputs come from that led you to make that decision?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and you could certainly take the other side of it and say, hey, if you didn't change, it's possible that you guys would be doing just as well, or if you didn't undertake it. So it's a really, really good question. It's a really hard question to answer. The driver for us was a couple of things, really. Number one, we really started this back in 2021, 2022, where there were very clear signs that let's call it the tech or the software bubble was starting to deflate a little bit, and money was a little bit too fast and loose in the software industry. That just put pressure on every single business. D2C businesses felt this kind of incoming financial pressure. Software businesses felt this incoming financial pressure of, hey, capital is not going to be as readily available. We need to focus more on profitability. And it just put a lot of pressure on the business. And so when there's a lot of pressure on the business and hey, all of a sudden just 3x growth every year is not even good enough, you also have to have profitability and all of these other things. When there's a lot of pressure on the business, you start to very, very closely look at your short and long-term prospects. So what happened to us was, we were still growing very, very quickly, but we just took a very hard look at retention. And we said, this might not be the most sustainable growth because our user retention is not best in class SaaS. And, could that have been a function of, hey, the economy is starting to turn for D2C businesses and those are our customers? It could have been. But we had conviction that we were going to be able to improve retention if we got closer to, where our clients thought, the metrics that we thought our clients thought of as core, which is revenue, top line revenue, and attributable revenue. We thought if we got closer to those metrics, we would be a more resilient business in really any economic cycle. And so we decided that we needed to get closer to those metrics. We worked really backwards from there of, all right, how do we do that? We looked at the affiliate landscape. We thought there was a major, major opportunity there of, something that we were well positioned for that we could do better than anybody else. And then we built the product, and it turned out the product worked very, very well. So that was kind of the journey for us. It was just pressure from the economy to build a better business. And we just decided that long term, we were not closely aligned enough with the core metrics of our partners to be a really must have, like critical piece of technology. So we made the adjustment.
Right, right. And can you talk a little bit about, what did you do yourself as head of the CEO? Like, where and how did you lean on your team? What were the different kind of roles or departments involved in kind of making that decision and figuring out like which direction to go?
Yeah, it was every team. Obviously, if you're trying to pivot a company, you're not going to, it's not democratic. You're not going to take a vote of every single person at the company. You have to have conviction uh, in leadership, and you have to be able to kind of sell that to everybody else. But I would say it was definitely kind of a full leadership team decision. So that involves, product as a core function of that. That involves sales as a core function of that, and that involves, customer success and support as a core function of that. We all talked about the exact challenge that, I just mentioned of, hey, our core metric for clients is just something that when times are really, really bad, they can turn off. And long term, we don't want to be positioned like that. If we're going to be $1 billion company, we can't be positioned like that. So everybody on the leadership team from every part of the business aligned on kind of what that macro level challenge was. And then, I think we kind of crowdsourced and came up with a really, really cool new product that everybody was really, really excited about. And it was only possible because the leadership team here, like I said earlier, were the type of people that can get really, really excited about change. It's just, who they are, myself aside and, the direction that I'm trying to push aside. They are just very, very ambitious people that wanted to build a really big, successful company. And they were ready to take on a very, very big challenge. So we talked about it. Every single part of the business was aligned with the changes that we were making when we were going in there. And ultimately, leadership was really, really excited about pursuing a big, awesome problem.
That's great. That's great. And you talked about the go-to-market changes. Can you talk about what some of those were?
Yeah. There's a couple components there. I would say, first and foremost is website. And it sounds like kind of a silly random thing, but in our experience, companies that can't articulate what they do very well usually are not good products and are not easy to sell. Like you have to have it doesn't matter what you do. You have to have such a clear value proposition that businesses will get it. And you're going to very obviously solve a pain for them. And it has to be, something you can articulate in 5 words. And so I would say actually the first challenge was, how do we articulate this so easily on the website that people will actually get it? And then actually from that, a lot of things kind of trickle down. So building a great website almost puts like the healthiest pressure on your business to make sure you're able to articulate your value prop very concisely. And so we had to make adjustments to the website. We had to, from there, the website is going to mirror what you're doing in your marketing channel. So if you're running ads, you're going to be talking about the exact same, problems and exact same value propositions. Your outbound emails are going to be articulating the exact same things. So top of the funnel and website need to be like perfectly aligned. And I would just say the challenge of building a great website puts that really, really helpful pressure on you. From there, we had to adjust the whole sales process. So the new product that we built, while we were really selling to the same people, it just had more interdependencies than our last product. We've always been selling to kind of like the influencer or social team, but the new product that we built had just major e-com components that the previous product didn't have. And so we had to, rebuild the sales motion of, we're not doing a demo. We're not, hey, it's a couple of calls articulating value prop, maybe a couple of references and then we're done. The new sales motion was, hey, we have to do all that, but we also have to have these follow-up calls with, e-com and technology teams and make sure we're articulating how easy and simple and how this fits in with the rest of somebody's technology stack. And so our sales process did get a lot more complicated and we had to build in additional steps, to be able to navigate that complexity. Now, very, very fortunately for us, we had very, very capable salespeople that were ready to handle that kind of complexity. I would just say that's not always going to be the case. Like you're going to have, if you're massively adjusting your sales and your go-to-market motion, it's not always going to be the case that the people that were really good at selling 6 months ago are going to continue to be selling as effectively as they were. there's all kinds of different, I would say, skills that are necessary to be able to effectively sell a product. And if you're making a big adjustment, you might have selected for the last product, not the new product. So we were very fortunate that our people were able to adjust and very malleable in that way, but it's just not always going to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like really a lot of things came together for you guys and kind of working through this. Are there any lessons learned that, hindsight's always 2020, looking back on it now, things you would have done differently if you were going about it second time around?
Yeah, and I would say, the big things for everybody to think about is, number one, change is hard. Um, but if you're going to pursue change, you have to pursue it with conviction. So, we're kind of on the tail end, and hopefully the pivot that we executed was going to be, not just short-term successful, but long-term successful. It's going to help us build a really big, powerful business. But, human nature is, you think about risk a lot and you probably think less about opportunity. We did probably a good enough job aggressively pursuing adjustments and change, but there's always going to be a human nature tendency to, not necessarily go all in on what you're doing. And I would say that the adjustment that, I would make with hindsight is we potentially should have even been more aggressive in how we executed a change. We, after, as we're going through this software pivot, things like, hey, we continue to have a lot of focus on making sure we're supporting our clients using the old product and things like that. Like if you're a very, very cutthroat, I want to build a big, successful business type person, you probably would have pulled even more resources out of what you were doing because you can just understand with, the clarity of hindsight, it just doesn't matter. Like if you're pivoting the business, all of that old revenue, all of those old processes, it just doesn't matter. Um, it's not going to be part of your 5 to 10 year vision. And so everything that you do has to be put into, kind of building the new and adjusting to the new. And I would say, the very tactical adjustment that we probably should have made a little bit more aggressively is not supporting the old product as much as we did. Now, obviously, most of our resources went into the new product, but like I said, a very cutthroat person would have been more like, "Hey, we've got our clients, but that's not the direction that we're going in." And they would have been a little bit more aggressive on, "Hey, we're not going to support the old thing." So
Right.
I didn't quite have the conviction to do that, but if I was really, really 100% focused on building a bit business, I would have pulled more resources out of it, just with the clarity of like, "Hey, if this new thing doesn't work, you're screwed anyway." Uh, so just don't kid yourself about it.
Right, right. Well, and I think as you say, like it's all about like risk tolerance and kind of the risk versus the opportunity. I'm curious, like as you think about your leadership team, are there different risk tolerances between different members and how do you guys navigate that?
Oh, 100%. That's such a great question. And I will kind of stereotype a little bit, actually. Between teams, you're typically going to find salespeople love to make money, right? And new shiny stuff to them is super exciting because, uh, there is no limit in terms of how much they feel like they can sell and how cool something can be. So I would say salespeople have a huge appetite for risk, and that's true with our company. Um, the people with lower risk appetites are definitely support, customer success, and engineering because they have to deal with the stuff. When things go wrong, everything rolls down to them and they have a very clear picture of like, oh my God, these are, the challenges that we're going to face day to day. Their lives get you know, they have to deal with the most stuff. Their lives get so much more challenging and they don't get the immediate feedback and kind of gratification of, hey, we sold more, blah, blah, blah. And so I'd say generally support and engineering are going to be less excited about change. But everybody, like I said, it's just degrees. At a software company and at our company, everybody is really excited about because everybody wants to be part of a $1 billion company. And they understand that, these are the types of decisions that you have to make. But I would say I would just stereotype, and our team probably holds true to it. Support and engineering are a little less excited than the marketing and sales people.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense given kind of some of those profiles. And you talked about, wanting to be, you could have been more aggressive. How much of that was kind of you personally? And I'm thinking of, myself and other, business owners. And I think like our personal kind of fears to push through and things like that tend to factor in. Can you talk about whether that was the case for you, and was there anything you had to push through personally to move forward?
It was 100% me. I'm not going to pretend it was like this organizational thing. It was 100% me. Uh, and I would say, oh, there's not a cool book with a cool title about it. Like the closest thing you could say is like the innovator's dilemma or anything. But the core of the problem, and this is a very specific problem with software, but the core of the problem is, you know, I've been doing this for 6 years. My whole life is in this, right? My friends and family have personally invested, uh, relevant percentages of their life savings to put into this company. So the way that I look at it, failure is really just not an option. It's going to be a decade of my life, and it's going to be very real percentages of my friends and family's life savings. Um, that attitude and kind of that perspective is actually not really, if you're kind of an AI, that's not exactly how you want a CEO to operate in the software space, because what you're looking for, if you're just trying to maximize returns, what you're looking for are really, really big outcomes. And to get to really, really big outcomes, you need to do aggressive, unconventional things. And so if you're like a VC that's just allocating capital, you want people that are absolutely nuts and they're going to pursue these really big outcomes because that's going to make you the most money in the long term. But as the people in the business, I would say it's just really, really hard to do that. And I definitely, as a human being, cannot do that. I would not be excited about, oh, hey, we tried really, really hard. We took the best statistical approach to this. It didn't work out. I've wasted a decade of my life, and all of my friends and family have lost their money. That wouldn't be very acceptable to me. And so human nature kind of commands me to say, all right, we're going to take a little bit of a measured approach to risk. But if we were thinking about it like, hey, how do you efficiently allocate capital, or what are the absolute right decisions to make for a software business? You would have a lot more risk tolerance. And that's kind of how VCs operate, venture capitalists. Um, they understand that to do the right things and make really, really big companies, you have to be willing to fail, and you have to be very, very aggressive about doing unconventional things. So it was 100% me. Um, I would say I do have a pretty big risk tolerance, but if I was, just kind of a machine or something like that, and the VCs and our board could 100%, take human nature out of it, we would pursue it even more aggressively.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's a really interesting point between the mindset of kind of the founder who has everything invested in it and the VC that is looking at it more, kind of hear the numbers and hear all the
Yeah.
different, uh, companies in the portfolio, and recognizing the tolerance there.
Yeah. And I think a great analogy, if anyone's a poker player, I can't remember like the billionaire that had this poker game like 15 years ago, but he thought there was an exploit. Poker players are machines, and they're supposed to make the right decision regardless of the risk. But he thought there was an exploit where, hey, if we make the stakes high enough, the human being part of it is going to cause these people to play poorly and not play correctly. And so all the best poker players in the world basically got destroyed by this billionaire who was able to make, mathematical decisions in the face of risk, and they couldn't do it. It was, the same mentality of, all right, this is a lot of money. This is life-changingly bad if I screw this up. And so they weren't able to take the appropriate amount of risk because human nature, commands that. And ultimately, if you're going to make the best decisions for an organization, particularly a software organization, you have to be willing to fail, and you have to be willing to take a lot of risk.
Right, right. Yeah, which goes back to the point you made about culture earlier, and kind of turning that inward on kind of yourself as a leader, that it's okay to fail as long as you're kind of moving forward in the right way and getting all those inputs. I'd love to ask you, like shifting a little bit to where you're focused today. Can you talk about what are the biggest challenges or priorities that you personally are focused on this year?
Yeah, I mean, from a business perspective, the challenges are, we did the whole product pivot that was wildly successful, but what we're finding is when you do something like that, everything in your business changes. And so we've made the adjustments, but one thing that changed for us is, you know, I would say, how big our target customers and our core customers are. Our core customers have gotten slightly more enterprise. They've gotten bigger. These are now kind of Fortune 100 type companies, Fortune 500 type companies. So we are still working on uh, executing playbooks that are more appropriate for Fortune 100 companies because of the structures and the processes that they have in place. So it's not even necessarily as much of a product change as it is our go-to-market and our support systems, making sure that they are very, very enterprise appropriate. That's really, really hard, right? And I'm very grateful that our team is adjusting to that, but it's also just kind of a hard human capital problem where typically if you're hiring for, somebody to sell or support those types of clients, it's a different persona that is going to sell kind of a small business or a mid-market person that's going to sell an enterprise person. And so we have very, I would say young, ambitious, malleable people that have adjusted to that well, but it is a very, very big challenge to kind of change who your target customer is. And we're still working through that. We deliver a lot of value for our clients, but articulating that and building processes that really work with major enterprises is still a work in progress. It's always going to be kind of a work in progress for us. So that's I would say a major business challenge um, that we're working on right now. On the personal level, it's just I would say uh, I'm always trying to figure out how I can be more invested in what I'm doing and kind of my work. And I'm always trying to be more efficient and be more aggressive about learning. And so, for me, the kind of the mediums and how you learn it have, changed over the last few years. And so I'm just trying to make sure that I'm still as aggressively learning as I could be compared to, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Can you talk a little bit about like where do you go for information? How do you push yourself in that department?
Yeah. I don't know if it's a function of my brain being destroyed by my phone or whatever, but I have found for myself that the best source of information is, now podcasts. And not to bias towards what we're doing right now, but I don't get a lot of value from, I would say, like, traditional digital media because I just feel like it's very templatized, and there's just not a lot of nuance in there. And so I think long form is super, super important, but my ADD Instagram brain has a harder time reading books than it used to, let's say 20 years ago. So I still try to read as much as I possibly can, but I would say all of the really nuanced, valuable things that I get now are pretty much from podcasts. So I'm going to listen to, 5 or 10 podcasts a week. It's just more enjoyable to me to kind of soak in the nuance of long form in that respect. I Once again, if I could force myself to do things, I would probably read more books. I do read books, but I would just say the intake for me is 10 to 1 podcast versus books. But I do think long form is just super important. At this point, there's just not a lot of like easy, valuable nuggets hanging out there that you can read a 1 page blog post on. Like information has been disseminated so much that you just know all that stuff already, and you almost know what they're going to say in different channels. The importance of where you can learn now to me is long form, and so that's podcasts and books.
Yep, yep. I'm pretty similar in that regard, like both the makeup of podcast and books. And as you're talking, I'm just thinking about even the way I read books. It's all audio, and it's similar to the way I consume podcasts. It's not kind of one book start to finish. It's, hey, I've got 4 or 5 books that I'm reading, depending on kind of what makes sense based on time of day, how much time I have, is kind of picking and choosing. So I think we each kind of curate the content we need that's most relevant to what we're working on, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, this is really great. Gary, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. Can you talk a little bit about your background? How did you go from Gary as a kid to where you are now?
Yeah. Really good question. So I grew up in between New Jersey and Connecticut. You know, uh, I would say my family was kind of very, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they come from these very entrepreneurial families. That was not my family. My family were lawyers. Everything was very traditional. I think that, kind of the path that we all were planning on going on were kind of very traditional. Hey, you're going to go into finance, you're going to go into consulting, you're going to, go do one of these very traditional paths. So that's how I started my career. I started my career in management consulting for Deloitte. That is like the most kind of cookie cutter corporate job that you can possibly have. And then I would say I probably realized quickly, within a year or two that that didn't energize me, but it took a while for me to actually figure out that that's not really where my passion was. It took me kind of staring down the model for management consulting is you do 3 or 4 years, then you go to business school, and then you go back and do 2 years, and they'll pay for your business school. It took me staring down the barrel of, hey, I'm about to go do 2 years of business school, and then I have to go back to consulting. So like, hey, I am right now making a decision for the next 4 years of my life. It took that level of pressure for me to say, I hate this. Uh, and I can't keep doing this for forever. Um, and it was just very fortunate for me. There was a serendipitous moment where somebody from my network, it was kind of a school thing, but I hadn't met this guy. Somebody from my network was this like crazy, like, wizard founder, and he sold me on the dream of, hey, software is awesome. It's fast. You can go be a badass. And we're gonna go do crazy stuff together. And so I sat down for a couple of lunches with him. I'm like, this guy is nuts, and I love it. I just want to be part of it. That was ultimately my segue into the software industry. After spending a couple of years in software, I knew this was a much, much better fit for myself because of all the things, like I said earlier, change is just a very important, aggressive piece of the software industry. And I loved it. The challenge of constantly adjusting and iterating and thinking for yourself really energized me. And so I spent a couple of years working for other people in software. And then I, also just very personally saw a bunch of people around me build their own software companies and, to be very candid, make a shit ton of money doing it and make a lot of decisions. And, they had a lot of personal freedom. And I was like, that looks awesome. And I think at this point I can do that too. So I'll give it a shot.
And that
I
was
would
your
say I
first
didn't,
venture?
yeah, with my first venture, it was an analytics company. And I would say I did totally know all the things that, I was signing up for at the time. It goes back to kind of upbringing and having, a lower, my family kind of had a lower risk tolerance, I think, than I just naturally did. I didn't know all the things that went into it. I didn't know what I had signed up for. It was a really, really rude awakening for what it's like to build a company. But ultimately, that was my passion. And I did love it. So, um, I think I turned out to be the type of person that didn't need consistent income, which is kind of the most important piece of it. If you don't need consistent income and you're willing to, change your lifestyle and kind of give up, and kind of a crazy amount of your personal time. But the payoff is like you get to be your own boss and you get to make decisions and pursue something wholeheartedly. If that's a trade-off that you want to make, it turned out well. And so just for me personally, I was willing to, cut my income by 95% and, cut my free time by 95%, but that was still just a good personal trade for me. Um, so yeah, it turned out I very much like what I did. And, now I'm on my second venture. And it's just, it's been an awesome experience. And I'll keep doing this forever, right? I'm not like, hey, I'm going to make a bunch of money and I'm going to stop building companies. Like at the end of the day, if you just like the challenge of it and that's how you want to spend, your 100 hours a week, then that's just how you want to spend your 100 hours a week.
Right, right. And tell me like how you got to starting Loud Crowd. You talk a little bit about what the company does and then kind of the origins that led you to start it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, maybe an important piece too is kind of me leaving my last company. So I started my last company with not like I would say like a very, very close friend, but a good friend. And it was an analytics company. We were working on that for a couple of years and it just got to the point, your relationship with your co-founder is very much like your relationship with your significant other, your partner. And it just got to the point after 2 years where that part of the thing wasn't working anymore. The business was doing well enough. But I don't think either one of us were energized by the other person showing up to work every day. And so I think we had gotten to a point where we just realized it wasn't working. And then at that very same time, I was talking about another idea with my best friend, best friend of, it's 19 years now. We had a big idea that we thought was going to be very, very powerful. It came from a field that we had both spent time in, which is social media data analytics. He was working for a company basically in that capacity and had a lot of experience selling in that capacity. We got very, very excited about this idea. And then we took the leap. And it was just one of those things, we had very early traction in the business, which makes it kind of easier to kind of stay the course. But it was also just a much, much better, I would say personal relationship, when we were getting going. And so I think we did energize each other. We did want to make each other want to show up to work a little bit more. And so if you're spending your days doing something you love with people you love, you're gonna enjoy it more. So uh, we started the business. We had a great idea. It was about we saw opportunity with influencer marketing, and basically influencer marketing at the time was big inorganic relationships, and you had celebrities, posting some coffee that everybody knew they'd never tasted before. We thought there was much more opportunity in kind of the micro influencer, nano influencer type space, brand advocate type space. We got very familiar with the software there. We knew there was an opportunity for software there. So the idea and kind of the big wave made a lot of sense to us, and we just knew that we were kind of going to be a good team. So that's how it got started.
That's great. And before we wrap up, you talked about how avid of a podcast listener you are. Curious if you have any favorite podcasts, favorite content to recommend to the other listeners.
Yeah, so obviously fully endorse this podcast, and I'm an avid listener of it. I would say, I would put my other podcasts into two categories. I'm in very specific kind of like social media and e-com podcasts, and so those are way more niche. If anybody's in like the e-com space and they want a couple of recommendations, I love e-commerce Fastlane. I love the ASOM podcast. Those are both really really great, but they're definitely niche, right? You got to be willing to geek out on very minute features of a website. For people that just want more general podcast recommendations, and that's actually most of what I listen to, because it just personally energizes me. Like if you're trying to wake up for work, I just do get a lot of motivation from hearing people's stories and people think about big problems. My favorite big podcasts are the All In podcast, which is a very cliche answer for anybody in the software industry, but it is very funny and it is awesome. Um, so I'll listen to that one religiously. I try to listen to as much as I can podcasts about people. And so things like How I Built This are very energizing for me. And then there's another podcast that's a little bit more focused on tech, but it's called Acquired. Um, if you are not intimidated by a 3 or 4 hour podcast, Acquired is just an awesome listen. Uh, I think for me, the mental hurdle that I had to get over was, uh, you're basically learning the story of a company, and that's usually a book. And I'm like, well, it's going to take me 12 hours to read a book about this. These guys are getting into that level of detail in 3 hours. That's a good trade off. But it is, I think the 3 hour podcast is a mental hurdle that people will need to navigate. So if you're into that, Acquired is great. I also listen to a little bit of Lex Friedman, although his conversations are very, slow and there are 4 hours to it, and you might not get to where you think you're going anyway. So that one's a little bit more challenging. Yeah, those are probably the big ones for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, those are some great recommendations. Acquired was a newer one for me. I think it was a Starbucks episode that sucked
Yeah,
me
I
in.
heard that one.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
that
very good.
that was a great episode. And the cool thing about Acquired too is, like I said, you're committing yourself to 3 hours. So that is what it is. And you have to be ready for that. Um, it is tech focused, but they have stuff that hits everybody. They've got Walmart, they've got these kind of big important companies that have impacted everybody's life. And it's just cool to know the story. Next time you go to a Walmart, how was this thing built and why does it look the way it looks? It's just kind of interesting to learn about that.
Right, right. Beyond the business lessons, gives you a new perspective on kind of the world around us and the products we experience, which is great.
Yeah.
So, Greg, as we wrap up today's conversation, if listeners want to get in touch with you, can you share what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I'm probably, for somebody that manages a social media company, I probably should be on more platforms, which I'm not. I would say the two big platforms for me, I'm on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to hit me up on LinkedIn, I'm available there. And then, business wise, the website I think is, loudcrowd.com is probably the best way to disseminate what we do and really how to get in touch with us from a business perspective. So let's say LinkedIn and loudcrowd.com.
Great, great. Thank you, Gary. This has been a really great conversation. So, really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Natalie. Love the pod. So very fun joining you and kind of getting into it. I think it's just such an important topic for people. Change is just the most critical piece of any organization, and so understanding how you can commit to that and really what the appropriate level is for your business is there's just no more important question.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you to everyone listening. I know I loved hearing about so much of what Gary shared, including his mindset for constant change and how that's permeated through his organization, all the details around how they've evolved their product and their go to market to go through kind of a big change as he described. And so if today's episode gave you, our listeners, any valuable insights, and I am sure that it did, please share this with someone. Spreading this kind of knowledge and information helps us all grow as leaders and equips us to drive successful change and transformation in our organization. So thanks again, Gary. And this has been another great episode of Shift and Thrive. See you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.